Margaret Chun walked through the empty halls of the Harmony Arts Center at 11 p.m. Her cleaning cart rolled quietly across the marble floor. She had been working here for 3 years as a night janitor. Every night was the same. She cleaned the offices, mopped the floors, and emptied the trash cans. The building was always quiet at this time. Only the security guard and Margaret were there. Margaret was 42 years old. She had short black hair and wore simple clothes. She was not tall or short, not fat or thin. She was the kind of person who did not stand out in a crowd. When people met her, they often forgot her name the next day. She spoke softly and always sighed, please, and thank you. Her coworkers knew she was polite and came to work on time every day. But they did not know much else about her. The Arts Center was a beautiful building. Rich people came here to watch concerts and plays. The main concert hall had red velvet seats and crystal lights hanging from the ceiling. Margaret had seen famous musicians perform here many times while she worked. She would stop cleaning and listen to the music from the hallway. The sound always made her feel something deep inside, but she never told anyone about this. Margaret had grown up in a small town called Millbrook. It was far from any big city. Her family lived in a tiny house with peeling paint and a broken fence. Her mother worked at the local diner, and her father fixed cars in their garage. They did not have much money, but they loved each other. Margaret was an only child. She spent most of her time alone, reading books from the library or helping her grandmother in the garden. Her grandmother was named Rose. She was a small woman with white hair and gentle hands. Rose had a secret that she shared only with Margaret. Many years ago, Rose had studied music at a famous school in the city. She had dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. But when she was young, her parents did not have money to support her dreams. She had to quit school and come back to the small town to help her family. Rose never forgot how to play piano. In the corner of her small house, she kept an old upright piano. The piano was brown and scratched. Several keys did not work properly. When you pressed them, they made no sound or stuck down. But Rose loved that piano anyway. She played it every evening after dinner. When Margaret was 7 years old, she heard her grandmother playing one night. The music was so beautiful that Margaret started to cry. She knocked on the door and asked if she could listen. Rose smiled and invited her inside. From that day on, Margaret visited her grandmother every afternoon after school. Rose began to teach Margaret how to play. The old piano was difficult to use because of the broken keys. But Rose showed Margaret how to play around the problems. She taught her to use different fingers and find new ways to make music. Margaret learned to play songs that sounded complete even though some notes were missing. Margaret was a fast learner. Her small fingers moved quickly across the keys. She could hear when a note was wrong and fix it right away. Rose was amazed at how well Margaret could play. She told Margaret that she had a special gift. Margaret practiced every day for 2 hours. She loved the feeling of the keys under her fingers and the sound that came from the piano. By the time Margaret was 12, she could play difficult pieces. She knew songs by famous composers like Chopin and Mozart. Rose taught her about music theory and how to read sheet music. Margaret dreamed of one day playing on a real piano, one where all the keys worked perfectly. She imagined herself on a big stage wearing a beautiful dress, playing for hundreds of people. But life in Millbrook was hard. When Margaret was 15, her father got sick. He could not work anymore. The family had no money for doctor bills or medicine. Margaret's mother worked extra hours at the diner, but it was not enough. Margaret had to get a job after school to help pay for food and rent. She stopped going to her grandmother's house every day. She could only visit on weekends. Rose understood why Margaret could not come as often, but she was sad. She worried that Margaret would forget how to play. But every time Margaret sat at the old piano, her fingers remembered exactly what to do. When Margaret was 18, she graduated from high school. She wanted to go to college to study music. Rose had saved a little money over the years to help Margaret follow her dreams. But then Margaret's father died suddenly. The family had to pay for the funeral and many medical bills. All of Rose's savings went to help Margaret's mother. Margaret made a difficult choice. She decided not to go to college. Instead, she got a full-time job at a factory to help her mother pay the bills. She told herself that she would save money and go to music school later. But days turned into months, and months turned into years. Margaret never had enough money to follow her dreams. Rose got older and sicker. When Margaret was 25, her grandmother died peacefully in her sleep. Margaret was heartbroken. Rose had been her best friend and her music teacher. At the funeral, Margaret played one of Rose's favorite songs on the old piano. Everyone in the small church cried. After Rose died, Margaret's mother sold the house and the piano. She needed the money to pay for Rose's medical bills. Margaret watched as strangers carried the old brown piano out of the house. She felt like they were taking away part of her heart. Margaret continued to work at the factory. She met a man named David and married him when she was 28. They were happy together for a few years, but David did not understand Margaret's love for music. He thought it was a waste of time. Slowly, Margaret stopped talking about her dreams. She put her music in a box in her mind and locked it away. When Margaret was 35, David left her for another woman. Margaret was alone again. She had no children and no close friends. She decided to start over in a new city. She moved to where the art center was located and got the job as a night janitor every night. Margaret walked past the beautiful grand pianos in the concert hall. She never touched them. She was not supposed to. But sometimes, when she was sure no one was watching, she would stand close to a piano and remember how it felt to play. Her fingers would move silently in the air, playing songs that only she could hear. Margaret had been working at the art center for 3 years now. Her co-workers were friendly, but she did not tell them about her past. She was afraid they would think she was lying or dreaming. How could a simple, clinging lady know how to play piano? So she kept her secret locked away, just like she had learned to lock away her dreams many years ago. But dreams have a way of finding their way back to the surface, even when we try to bury them deep. December was always a busy time at the Arts Center. The building was decorated with Christmas lights and green garlands. Red ribbons hung from the walls, and a big Christmas tree stood in the main lobby. Margaret worked extra hours during this time because there were more events and more people visiting. The staff at the Arts Center always had a holiday party in the 3rd week of December. Margaret had been to 2 of these parties before. She usually stood in the corner, ate a small piece of cake, and went home early. She did not talk much to her coworkers. They were nice people, but Margaret felt like she did not belong with them. This year, the party was going to be held in the main concert hall. This was unusual. Most years, they had the party in the small meeting room upstairs. But the meeting room was being painted, so Mr. Williams, the director of the Art Center, decided to use the big concert hall instead. Margaret felt nervous about having the party in the concert hall. This was the room where famous musicians performed. She cleaned this room every night, but she had never been here during the day with all the lights on and other people around. She worried that people would notice her more in such a big, fancy room. The day of the party, Margaret finished her regular work early. She went home to her small apartment and changed into her best dress. It was a simple blue dress that she had bought 3 years ago. She looked at herself in the mirror and wondered if she should just stay home. But she knew that if she did not go, people would ask her about it the next day. Margaret arrived at the Arts Center at 6 p.m. The concert hall looked different with all the lights on. Round tables were set up around the room with white tablecloths and small flower arrangements. There was a long table with food and drinks at the back of the room. About 40 people were already there, talking and laughing. Margaret saw her supervisor, Mrs. Garcia, near the food table. Mrs. Garcia was a kind woman who always remembered to ask Margaret how she was feeling. She waved at Margaret and smiled. Margaret walked over to her. "Margaret, I'm so glad you came," Mrs. Garcia said. "You look very nice in that dress. Come, let me introduce you to some people." Margaret followed Mrs. Garcia around the room. She met people from the box office, the maintenance crew, and the administrative staff. Everyone was friendly, but Margaret felt awkward. She was not good at making small talk. She mostly just smiled and nodded while other people talked. Tom Rodriguez was the head of the maintenance crew. He was a big man with a loud laugh and a thick mustache. He had worked at the art center for 15 years and knew everyone. Tom was the kind of person who made jokes and told funny stories. People liked being around him because he made them. About an hour into the party, Tom noticed something wrong with the grand piano on the stage. The art center had 3 grand pianos, but the main one was a beautiful black Steinway that cost more than most people's houses. Earlier that day, some workers had moved the piano to make room for a special event. But something had gone wrong during the move. Tom walked up to the piano and pressed a few keys. Some of them made normal sounds, but others made strange noises. Or no sound at all. Several keys were stuck and would not come back up when he pressed them. The piano was clearly broken. "Hey, everyone," Tom called out loudly. "Look at this. Those movers damaged our beautiful piano." He pressed the broken keys again to show people the problem. "Listen to this. It sounds terrible." People gathered around the piano to see what Tom was talking about. Mr. Williams, the director, looked very upset. The piano was one of the most valuable things in the building. He started talking about calling the moving company and making them pay for repairs. Margaret stood at the back of the group, watching quietly. She could see exactly what was wrong with the piano. 3 keys in the middle section were stuck, and 2 keys on the lower end were not making any sound at all. It reminded her of the old piano at her grandmother's house. She found herself thinking about how she would play around these broken keys. Tom was still making jokes about the situation. "Well, at least we know this piano won't be disturbing any parties," he said. "Maybe we should just get rid of it and buy a new one." Margaret almost spoke up to say that the piano could still be played, but she caught herself. She was not supposed to know anything about pianos. She was just a cleaning lady. She stayed quiet and tried to blend into the crowd, but Tom had noticed Margaret standing nearby. He was the kind of person who liked to include everyone in his jokes. He had seen Margaret cleaning around the pianos many times, and he thought it would be funny to pretend she was a piano expert. "Hey, Margaret," Tom called out in a loud voice. "You're around these pianos every night. What do you think? Can you fix this thing?" Everyone turned to look at Margaret. She felt her face get hot and red. She shook her head quickly and took a step back. "I don't know anything about pianos," she said quietly, but Tom was not done with his joke. He was enjoying the attention from the crowd. "Come on, Margaret. You must have learned something from being around all these instruments. Maybe you have magic fingers that can heal broken pianos." Some people in the crowd started to laugh. They thought Tom was being funny. Margaret felt embarrassed and wanted to disappear. She shook her head again and tried to move away from the piano. "I really don't know anything about pianos," she said. Her voice even quieter than before, but Tom was not paying attention to how uncomfortable Margaret looked. He was having too much fun with his joke. "Everyone, what do you think? Should we let Margaret try to play this broken piano? Maybe she surprise us all?" The crowd started to join in with Tom's joke. "Yeah, let Margaret try," someone called out. "What's the worst that could happen? It's already broken." "Come on, Margaret," said another person. "Just press a few keys." "It'll be fun." Margaret looked around the room. Everyone was staring at her and smiling. They thought this was all very amusing. They had no idea that their joke was making her feel terrible. She had spent years hiding her musical ability, and now they were pushing her toward a piano as if it was the funniest thing in the world. Mrs. Garcia could see that Margaret was uncomfortable. She tried to help by saying, "Leave Margaret alone. She doesn't have to do anything she doesn't want to do." But Tom was not ready to let his joke end. "Oh, come on, Mrs. Garcia. It's just for fun. Margaret won't mind, will you, Margaret?" Margaret felt trapped. If she said no, people would think she was being unfriendly. If she said yes, she would have to sit at the piano and pretend she could not play. Either way, she would be the center of attention, which was the last thing she wanted. "I really can't play piano," Margaret said one more time. That's perfect, Tom said with a big grin. None of us can play either. You'll fit right in. Come on, just sit down and press a few keys. We all want to hear what a broken piano sounds like. The crowd was getting more excited. They thought they were about to watch something funny. Margaret realized that she could not escape this situation. Everyone was watching her, waiting for her to do something. She felt like she was in a spotlight. Even though the room lights were normal, Margaret's hands were shaking as she slowly walked toward the piano. She could feel her heart beating fast. She sat down on the piano bench and looked at the keys. The broken keys were easy to spot. She could see which ones were stuck and which ones were not working. For a moment, Margaret forgot about the crowd behind her. She was looking at a piano that needed help, just like the old piano at her grandmother's house. Her fingers naturally moved toward the keys, and she could almost hear Rose's voice telling her how to work around the problems. But then she remembered where she was and who was watching her. She was not a little girl learning from her grandmother anymore. She was a 42-year-old cleaning lady who was supposed to be bad at playing piano. She had to pretend she did not know what she was doing. Margaret pressed one of the working keys. Very softly, it made a beautiful, clear sound. Then she pressed one of the broken keys. It made a dull, ugly noise. The crowd laughed. There you go, Tom said. Now we know for sure it's broken. Thanks for the professional opinion, Margaret. Margaret started to get up from the piano bench. She had done what they wanted. She had played the piano badly, and now the joke was over. She could go back to being invisible, but as she stood up, something inside her heart felt very sad. She had just touched a piano for the first time in years, and she had to pretend she did not know how to make it sing. The broken keys reminded her so much of her grandmother's piano that she almost started to cry. Margaret looked at the piano one more time before walking away. She wondered what would happen if she actually played something beautiful. Would people believe it was really her? Or would they think someone else was playing and she was just moving her fingers? She would never. No, because she was too afraid to find out. Margaret walked away from the piano, but she could not stop thinking about it. She went to the food table and got a small piece of cake. She tried to eat it, but it tasted like nothing. Her mind was still on the piano keys and how they felt under her fingers. She found a chair in the corner and sat down. From there, she could see the piano on the stage. The black wood was shiny under the lights. Even with the broken keys, it was still a beautiful instrument. Margaret remembered the first time she had seen a grand piano like this one. She was 8 years old, and her grandmother had taken her to a concert in the next town over. Margaret had been amazed by how big and elegant the piano looked. The party continued around her. People were talking and laughing. Someone had brought a portable speaker, and they were playing Christmas music. A few people were dancing near the food table. Margaret watched them, but she felt like she was watching from behind a glass wall. She was there, but she was not really part of it. Tom was still near the piano, showing different people how the keys were broken. He was enjoying being the center of attention. Every few minutes, he would press the broken keys and make jokes about the sounds they made. Margaret could see that he was having fun, but each time he hit those keys roughly, she felt a little hurt inside. Mrs. Garcia came over to Margaret's corner. "Are you okay?" she asked kindly. "You look a little sad." "I'm fine," Margaret said. But her voice was quiet. Mrs. Garcia sat down in the chair next to Margaret. "Tom was just being silly. He didn't mean to embarrass you. He's actually a very nice person, but sometimes he doesn't think about how his jokes affect other people." Margaret nodded. She knew Mrs. Garcia was trying to make her feel better. "It's okay. I know he was just having fun." "Still, he shouldn't have put you on the spot like that," Mrs. Garcia said. "Not everyone wants to be the center of attention." Margaret looked at Mrs. Garcia. She was a thoughtful woman who seemed to understand how Margaret felt. For a moment, Margaret wondered what would happen if she told Mrs. Garcia the truth about her musical background. But she quickly pushed that thought away. It was too dangerous. If she told one person, soon everyone would know. After Mrs. Garcia went back to the party, Margaret sat alone again. She watched as more people gathered around the piano. Mr. Williams, the director, was explaining to a group of donors how expensive it would be to fix the piano. He looked stressed about the whole situation. Margaret knew that the piano was not as badly damaged as everyone thought. The stuck keys could probably be fixed easily by a piano technician. The keys that made no sound might need more work, but the piano was still playable. She had learned to work with much worse problems on her grandmother's old piano. As she watched the people around the piano, Margaret started to feel something she had not felt in years. It was a deep longing to play music again. The feeling was so strong that it made her chest hurt. She had buried her musical dreams so deep that she thought they were gone forever. But being this close to a piano was waking up something inside her that she thought was dead. Margaret tried to push the feeling away. She reminded herself that she was just a cleaning lady. She was not a musician. She had made peace with that fact years ago. But the feeling would not go away. It kept growing stronger, like a fire that someone was blowing on. More time passed. The party was getting louder and more cheerful. Someone had brought out a karaoke machine, and people were taking turns singing Christmas songs. Margaret watched a few people sing, but she was not really paying attention. Her eyes kept going back to the piano. Tom was still near the piano, but he was talking to a different group of people now. He was telling them about other funny things that had happened at the Arts Center over the years. Margaret could see that. He was a good storyteller. People were laughing at his jokes. Then Tom noticed Margaret sitting by herself in the corner. He felt a little bad about embarrassing her earlier. He was not a mean person, and he had not meant to make her uncomfortable. He walked over to her. "Hey, Margaret," he said, sitting down next to her. "I hope you're not upset about what happened with the piano." "I was just trying to have some fun." Margaret looked at him. "It's okay," she said. "I understand." "You know," Tom said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about not knowing anything about pianos. But I've seen you working in the concert hall, and you're always very careful around the instruments. You clean them gently, like you respect them. That's more than most people do." Margaret was surprised by Tom's observation. She had not realized that anyone noticed how she cleaned the pianos. "I just don't want to damage them," she said. "But it's more than that," Tom said. "I've worked with a lot of cleaning people over the years. Most of them treat the instruments like they're just furniture, but you treat them like they're special, like they're alive or something." Margaret felt her heart beating faster. Tom was seeing something that she had tried to hide. "I just think they're beautiful," she said carefully. Tom nodded. "They are beautiful, and you know what? I think you might know more about pianos than you let on." Margaret shook her head quickly. "No, I really don't know anything about them." But Tom was not convinced. "Come on, Margaret. When you looked at that broken piano, I saw something in your eyes. You were not just looking at it, you were understanding it. There's a difference." Margaret felt panic rising in her chest. Tom was getting too close to her secret. She had to make him stop thinking about this. "I really don't know how to play piano," she said firmly. Tom smiled. "Maybe you don't know how to play, but I think you know something about music, and you know what? I think you should give it a try." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked. "I mean, why don't you go back to that piano and actually try to play something, not just press random keys like before?" "Really try." Margaret felt her face get hot again. "I can't do that. Everyone will watch me." "So what if they watch you?" Tom said, "What's the worst that could happen? You play badly? The piano is already broken. You can't make it worse." Margaret looked across the room at the piano. It seemed to be calling to her. She could imagine her fingers moving across the keys, finding the notes that worked and avoiding the ones that did not. She could almost hear the music in her head. "I don't know," she said quietly. Tom stood up. "You know what? I'm going to make this easier for you. I'm going to tell everyone that I want to hear what the piano sounds like when someone actually tries to play it. Not just random noise, but real music, and I'm going to ask you to do it." "No, please don't," Margaret said, but Tom was already walking away. Margaret watched in horror as Tom went back to the piano. He called out to the room in his loud voice, Everyone, can I have your attention for a minute? The room started to get quiet. People stopped their conversations and looked. At Tom, Margaret felt like she was going to be sick. I've been thinking about this broken piano, Tom said. We've all been treating it like it's completely useless. But what if it's not? What if someone who really knows about music could make it sound good anyway? People were listening to Tom with interest. Margaret could see that they were curious about what he was going to say next. I think we should give Margaret another chance, Tom continued. I've been watching her work around these pianos for years, and I think she knows more about music than she's telling us. I think she could actually play something on this broken piano. The room was completely quiet now. Everyone was looking at Tom, and then they started looking around for Margaret. She felt like she wanted to disappear into the floor. What do you say, Margaret? Tom called out. Will you try to play something real this time? Not just random keys, but actual music? Margaret felt like she could not breathe. Everyone in the room was looking at her now. She could see their faces turned toward her, waiting for her answer. Some people looked curious, others looked amused, and a few looked skeptical. Mrs. Garcia was looking at her with concern. Mr. Williams looked interested but doubtful. The other cleaning staff members looked surprised that Tom was asking Margaret to do this. Margaret knew she had to make a choice. She could say no and run away, which would be safe but would probably make people think she was strange. Or she could say yes and risk everything. If she played badly, people would laugh at her. If she played well, they would ask questions she was not ready to answer. But as she looked at the piano, Margaret remembered her grandmother's words from many years ago. Music is not about being perfect, Margaret. It's about being honest. When you play, you're sharing a piece of your heart with the world. Margaret had been hiding her heart for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to share it. But now, surrounded by all these people and facing this broken piano, she felt something stirring inside her. It was her grandmother's voice, calling to her across the years. Margaret stood up slowly. Her legs felt shaky, but she started walking toward the piano. She could feel everyone's eyes on her as she moved across the room. With each step, she felt more afraid, but also more alive than she had felt in years. She reached the piano and sat down on the bench. The keys looked different. Now, they were not just broken pieces of a machine. They were possibilities. They were ways to make beauty out of damage. Margaret's fingers touched the keys and something magical happened. The first note she played was soft and clear. It was a simple note, but it filled the room with a pure, beautiful sound. The second note followed, and then the third. Margaret was playing a piece by Chopin that her grandmother had taught her many years ago. The broken keys did not stop her. Margaret remembered exactly where they were, and she played around them. When she needed a note that was broken, she found a different note that sounded almost the same. When a key was stuck, she used her other fingers to create the music she wanted. She made the piano sing even though it was damaged. The room was completely silent. Everyone had stopped talking, stopped moving, stopped breathing. They were all staring at Margaret in shock. This was not what they had expected. They had expected her to play badly, to make noise, to prove that she really did not know anything about pianos. Instead, she was playing like a professional musician. Margaret was not thinking about the people watching her anymore. She was lost in the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with perfect control. She had not played piano in years, but her body remembered everything. The music flowed through her like water flowing through a riverbed that had been dry for too long. The piece she was playing was called Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a slow, dreamy piece that sounded like someone thinking about beautiful memories. Margaret had always loved this piece because it reminded her of sitting with her grandmother on quiet evenings. Listening to the sound of rain on the rooftop as she played, Margaret began to change. The scared, quiet cleaning lady disappeared. In her place sat a confident musician who knew exactly what she was doing. Her back was straight, her shoulders were relaxed, and her face showed deep concentration. She looked like she belonged at the piano. Tom was standing closest to the piano, and he could not believe what he was seeing. His mouth was open, and he was shaking his head slowly. He had thought Margaret might be able to play a simple song, but this was incredible. She was playing like someone who had studied music for years. Mrs. Garcia was near the back of the room, and she had tears in her eyes. She was thinking about how Margaret had always seemed sad and lonely. Now she understood why. Margaret had been hiding a huge part of herself from the world. Mr. Williams was standing with a group of donors who had stayed for the party. They were all music lovers who had heard thousands of concerts at the Arts Center. They knew good music when they heard it, and they were amazed by what Margaret was doing. One of them whispered, "How is this possible? She's playing that broken piano like it's a Stradivarius." Margaret continued to play, and the music got more complex. She was not just playing the notes that were written on the page. She was adding her own touches, her own feelings. She was making the music her own. The broken keys forced her to be creative, and she was turning those problems into something beautiful. The other cleaning staff members were the most shocked of all. They had worked with Margaret for years, and they had never imagined that she could do anything like this. Maria, who cleaned the offices upstairs, was thinking about all the times Margaret had seemed distant during their conversations. Now she realized that Margaret had been thinking about music. As Margaret played, she began to remember things she had forgotten. She remembered the feeling of her grandmother's hands guiding her fingers when she was learning a new piece. She remembered the smell of her grandmother's house, which always smelled like flowers and old books. She remembered the sound of her grandmother's voice saying, "Music is the language of the heart, Margaret. When you play, you're talking to people's souls." The music Margaret was playing was talking to everyone's souls. People who had been joking and laughing a few minutes before were now completely serious. Some of them were crying. Others were smiling with wonder. All of them were feeling something deep and powerful. Margaret's playing was not perfect. The broken keys sometimes forced her to make strange choices. But somehow those imperfections made the music more beautiful. It sounded like life itself, which is never perfect but can still be amazing. As the piece continued, Margaret began to play with more emotion. She was not just playing notes anymore. She was telling a story. The story was about a young girl who loved music, and about an old woman who taught her everything she knew. It was about dreams that were put away and love that was never forgotten. It was about finding something beautiful in something broken. The room was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. Nobody wanted to move or make any noise that might disturb the music. They were all afraid that if they moved, Margaret might stop playing and the spell would be broken. Margaret was coming to the end of the piece. The final notes were soft and gentle, like a whisper or a prayer. She played them with such tenderness that everyone in the room felt like they were hearing something sacred. The last note hung in the air for a long moment, and then there was silence. Margaret lifted her hands from the keys and looked at them. They were shaking a little bit, but they felt alive in a way they had not felt for years. She had done it. She had played music again after all this time, and it had been beautiful. For a moment, Margaret forgot about the people watching her. She was thinking about her grandmother. She could almost feel Rose's presence in the room, smiling and proud. Margaret whispered quietly, "Thank you, Grandma." Then Margaret remembered where she was. She turned around on the piano bench and looked at the crowd. Everyone was staring at her with expressions of complete amazement. Their faces looked like they had just seen a miracle. The silence continued for what felt like a very long time. Margaret began to feel nervous again. She wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe she should not have played so well. Maybe she should have pretended to be bad at piano like they expected. Then Tom started to clap. He was clapping slowly and steadily, and his eyes were wide with wonder. One by one, other people joined in. The clapping got louder and faster. Soon everyone in the room was applauding. But this was not the kind of polite clapping that people do at the end of a work presentation. This was the kind of applause that people give when they have just witnessed something extraordinary. It was loud and enthusiastic and full of emotion. Some people were not just clapping. They were cheering and whistling. Mrs. Garcia was crying and clapping at the same time. Mr. Williams was shaking his head in disbelief while he applauded. The donors were looking at each other with expressions that said, "Did we really just hear that?" Margaret sat at the piano, not knowing what to do. She had never received applause like this before. When she was young, her grandmother had always clapped for her after she played, but that was different. This was a room full of people who were genuinely amazed by what she had done. The applause continued for almost a full minute. Margaret felt overwhelmed by the response. She had spent so many years trying to be invisible, and now she was the center of attention in the most dramatic way possible. Finally, the applause began to die down. People were still looking at Margaret with wonder, but they were also starting to whisper to each other. Margaret could hear fragments of their conversations. "How did we not know about this? She's been working here for 3 years. That was incredible. She played that broken piano like it was perfect. Who is she really?" Margaret realized that her secret was completely out now. Everyone knew that she was not just a simple cleaning lady. They knew that she was a musician and a very good one. She felt scared and excited at the same time. Tom was the first person to approach her. He walked up to the piano with a big smile on his face, but Margaret could see that he was also a little embarrassed. He had been making jokes about her playing piano, and now he realized how wrong he had been. "Margaret," Tom said, his voice much quieter than usual. "I don't know what to say. That was amazing. I'm sorry I made jokes about you and the piano. I had no idea you could play like that." Margaret looked at Tom and saw that he was being sincere. "It's okay," she said softly. "You didn't know, but how?" Tom asked. "How do you play like that? You're incredible." "That was better than most of the concerts I've heard in this hall before." Margaret could answer. Other people started gathering around the piano. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to ask her questions, to understand how this had happened. Mrs. Garcia was one of the first to reach her. She had tears on her cheeks, and she looked at Margaret with new eyes. "Margaret, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Why didn't you ever tell us you could play piano?" Margaret felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She was not used to people asking her questions or looking at her with such interest. I don't usually talk about it," she said. Mr. Williams pushed through the crowd to get closer to Margaret. His face showed a mixture of amazement and confusion. "Margaret, I need to understand this. You work as a janitor here, but you play piano like a professional musician. What's going on?" Margaret looked around at all the faces staring at her. They were waiting for an explanation. She had kept her secret for so long that she did not know how to start telling the truth. "My grandmother taught me when I was little," Margaret said quietly. "But that was a long time ago." The next morning, Margaret woke up in her small apartment feeling like she was in a different world. Everything looked the same, but she felt completely changed. She lay in bed thinking about what had happened at the party. Had she really played piano in front of all those people? Had they really applauded and cheered for her? It felt like a wonderful dream, but she knew it had been real. Margaret got dressed and went to work as usual. But when she arrived at the art center, everything was different. People who had never talked to her before were smiling and waving. The security guard at the front desk called out, "Good morning, Margaret. I heard you gave an amazing performance last night." Word about Margaret's piano playing had spread through the entire building overnight. People who had not been at the party were hearing the story from people who had been there. By the time Margaret got to her cleaning supplies, half the staff knew about what had happened. Mrs. Garcia found Margaret in the supply closet. "Margaret, I'm so glad you're here. Mr. Williams wants to see you in his office. He said it's important." Margaret felt nervous. She had never been called to the director's office before. She wondered if she was in trouble for playing the piano without permission. Maybe Mr. Williams had changed his mind about what happened. Last night, Margaret knocked on Mr. Williams' office door, and he called for her to come in. His office was large and elegant, with pictures of famous musicians on the walls. Margaret had cleaned this office many times, but she had never sat down in it. "Please have a seat," Mr. Williams said, pointing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." Margaret sat down and waited for Mr. Williams to speak. She tried to read his expression, but she could not tell if he was happy or upset. "Margaret," Mr. Williams began, "what you did last night was extraordinary. I've been thinking about it all morning, and I have some questions for you." "Okay," Margaret said quietly. "First, I want to understand your musical background. You said your grandmother taught you, but the level of skill you showed last night suggests years of serious training. Can you tell me more about your musical education?" Margaret took a deep breath. She had decided during the walk to work that she would tell the truth if anyone asked. "My grandmother studied at the New England Conservatory when she was young. She was very talented, but she had to quit because her family needed money. She taught me everything she knew from the time I was 7 until I was 18. "And after that?" Mr. Williams asked. "After that, I stopped playing. My father got sick, and I had to work to help my family. I never had the chance to study music formally or pursue it as a career." Mr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. "And you've been working as a janitor here for 3 years, walking past these pianos every night, never saying anything about your musical ability." "Yes," Margaret said. "I didn't think it mattered. I'm not a professional musician. I'm just someone who used to play piano a long time ago." "Margaret," Mr. Williams said, leaning forward in his chair, "what you did last night was not the work of someone who used to play piano. What you did was the work of a gifted musician. You took a broken instrument and made it sing. You moved an entire room of people to tears." Margaret did not know what to say. She had never thought of herself as a gifted musician. She had always just thought of herself as someone who loved music. "I have a proposition for you," Mr. Williams continued. "Our community outreach coordinator just quit to take a job in another city. We need someone to run our music education programs for local schools and community groups. The job involves teaching basic music skills, organizing small concerts, and helping people discover the joy of music. Would you be interested?" Margaret stared at Mr. Williams in shock. "You want me to teach music?" "I want you to share your gift." Mr. Williams said, "You have something special, Margaret. You have the ability to make music accessible to people, to show them that even broken instruments can create beauty. That's exactly what our community programs need." Margaret felt overwhelmed. "But I'm not qualified to teach music. I don't have a degree or any formal credentials." "You have something better than credentials," Mr. Williams said. "You have talent, passion, and the ability to connect with people. Last night, you took a room full of skeptical people and turned them into believers. That's the kind of teacher we need." Margaret thought about the offer. It seemed too good to be true. "What would I actually do in this job?" "You would work with children in local schools who don't have access to music programs. You would teach basic piano and music theory to adults in our community education classes. You would help organize small concerts and recitals. And maybe most importantly, you would show people that music is not just for professionals or wealthy, people who can afford expensive lessons." Margaret felt excited and scared at the same time. "I don't know if I can do it. I've never taught anyone except myself." "Teaching is just sharing what you know with someone who wants to learn," Mr. Williams sighed. "Based on what I saw last night, I think you have a lot to share." Margaret was quiet for a moment, thinking about the opportunity. Then she asked, "What about my job as a janitor?" "I need the income." "The community outreach coordinator position pays more than your current job," Mr. Williams said. "And you would be working during normal business hours instead of night shifts." Margaret felt like she was dreaming again. This was the kind of opportunity she had stopped believing could happen to her. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Mr. Williams said. "But I hope you'll say yes. After last night, I believe you could make a real difference in people's lives." Margaret left Mr. Williams' office feeling dizzy with possibility. She walked through the halls of the Arts Center, seeing everything with new eyes. The concert hall where she had played the night before looked different now. It was not just a room she cleaned. It was a place where she had found herself again, over the next few days. Word about Margaret's performance continued to spread. Local newspapers heard about the story and wanted to interview her. A video that someone had taken with their phone was shared on social media and viewed thousands of times. People were calling Margaret's performance inspiring and magical. Margaret was not used to so much attention, but she found that she enjoyed talking to people about music. When reporters asked her about her story, she told them about her grandmother and the old broken piano. She talked about how music had always been a part of her. Even when she was not playing. 1 week after the party, Margaret made her decision. She accepted Mr. Williams' job offer. Her first day as the community outreach coordinator was both exciting and terrifying. She spent the morning setting up her new office and the afternoon visiting a local elementary school that had no music program. The children at the school were curious about Margaret. They had heard that she was coming to teach them about music, but they did not know what to expect. Margaret brought a small keyboard with her and set it up in the school's cafeteria. "Who here likes music?" Margaret asked the group of 30. Children sitting on the floor in front of her. Almost every hand went up. Margaret smiled. "Good, music is one of the most important things in life. It helps us express our feelings, connect with other people, and find joy even when things are difficult." Margaret began to play simple songs on the keyboard. She taught the children to clap along with the rhythm and to sing simple melodies. She told them that music was not about being perfect. It was about having fun and sharing emotions. One little girl raised her hand. "My mom says we can't afford piano lessons. Does that mean I can't learn music?" Margaret looked at the little girl and remembered herself at that age, dreaming of playing beautiful music, but knowing her family could not afford lessons. "Music is for everyone," Margaret said. "You don't need expensive lessons or fancy instruments to make music. You can make music with your voice, with simple instruments, or even with things you find around your house." Margaret spent the next hour teaching the children simple ways to make music. She showed them how to use pencils as drumsticks and how to turn glasses of water into musical instruments. The children were delighted and engaged. As Margaret worked with the children, she realized that this was what she was meant to do. She was not just teaching them about music, she was showing them that they had the power to create beauty in their lives. Even if they did not have much money or fancy equipment. After the school visit, Margaret went back to the art center feeling energized and purposeful. She had found her calling. She was going to spend her life helping other people discover the joy of music. Over the following months, Margaret's programs grew and flourished. She started music classes for senior citizens at a local community center. She organized small concerts where her students could perform for their families and friends. She worked with teenagers who had never thought they could learn music. Margaret's most popular program was called Making Music with What You Have. In this class, she taught people how to create beautiful music even when they did not have access to perfect instruments or ideal conditions. She used her experience with broken pianos to show people that limitations could actually lead to creativity. 1 year after the holiday party that changed her life, Margaret was invited to give a special concert at the Art Center.